سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح يسعك الفضاء الرحيب الفسيح تنحى يا حزن واهجر فؤادا توكل بجد بعزم فصيح فإني علمت بأنك نجوى ولبس خبيث مضل قبيح تبختر ترجل بصوت وخيل فما لك في الأرض درب صحيح إلى الله عدنا وبالله نذنا ليطوى زمان بائس شحيح ليطوى زمان بائس شحيح سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح يسعك الفضاء الرحيب الفسيح سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح يسعك الفضاء الرحيب الفسيح.
كتاب الله للأرواح نور تنال به السعادة والسرور إلى درب الهدى والخير يهدي وللجنات يوصل من يسير كتاب الله للأرواح نور
تبارك مودع البركات فيه فليس لفضله أبدا قصور فمن بركاته عقل سليم ورأي صائب فكر منير ورأي صائب فكر منير فيا من أقبلوا للحفظ بشرى فإن السعي منكم لا يبور جنيتم من ثمار الحسن حسنا وأقبلت العطايا والأجور
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to tonight's stream. So today, let's begin. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulil Kareem Maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Today we're going to be talking about a very important topic in theology, philosophy, and whatnot. We're going to talk about the main question of whether God does he exist or not, and how as Muslims how we can give the da'wah to atheists, all those who agnostics and things like that about the existence of a God. So we've got different lines of arguments. There's the cosmological argument, design argument, necessary and contingent argument, all put forward by different philosophers. For time purposes, obviously, we can't go through all of them. So today we're going to be looking at the cosmological argument, the design argument, and the necessary and contingent existence argument. So I'll let Zakariya take over now and talk about the cosmological argument that was put forward by Thomas Aquinas.
All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Okay. The cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, essentially boils down to three premises that we need to establish. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. So let's just take the mobile phone or whatever computer, laptop you're using. That begins to exist, and it has a cause, produced in a factory, and then it's sold to you, and you use it, you make use of it. All right, fine. Premise number two: the universe begins to exist. Now, how can we establish this? So, with facts that have been proven mainly through physics and astronomy, like redshift theory, we can establish that the universe has been expanding and still is until now. Now, probably the best way, because I don't want to get into the technical jargon, most people wouldn't understand it, but the best way to make you understand it is think of a balloon, and you're blowing into that balloon. The balloon is expanding. So if the balloon has, as you're blowing into it, has been expanding, if you rewind, you go back, you can see the balloon getting smaller, and it at the beginning it came from a point. So we can establish that at one point the universe came from one point, and if you go even further back, what do we find? We find that the universe didn't exist at one point. It means it could not have been eternal. I don't want to get into the technical jargon. You can do your own research. You can look at redshift theory and the likes of many physicists, who've proven this, that the universe has been expanding, and the light and the different waves and rays and how they expand, basically. But fine. So the universe begins to exist. We've established that. Therefore, the universe has a cause. This is essentially the final conclusion, the final premise that forces you to accept that the universe has a cause. Now, when we get into debates with atheists, and you see many theists get into debate with atheists, they establish that the universe has a cause, but they assume that the cause that we're talking about and the cause that they're talking about is different. They assume that the cause we're talking about is not a sentient, conscious cause. They think it's just some accident, like a little spark or fire or something that just made it explode into existence. And the theist is assuming that they're talking about something sentient. So we need to establish that. So now that we've established the universe has been caused, you can't cause something without having a will. This is common sense. We find it everywhere. You cannot open the door as you're leaving or entering a room without wanting to close or open the door, and vice versa for closing. This is just common sense everywhere. So we've established now this cause has a will. Okay, if this cause that has a will is powerful enough to bring the universe into existence, therefore it's more powerful than the universe and everything else this cause brought into existence. Therefore it is the most powerful, all powerful. And you work slowly, step by step, until we establish basically the existence of God from that angle. Now I'm going to pass it over to Maheer. He's going to shift the angle now and look at it from a different perspective. Maheer, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
All right, thanks. So we've Zakariya has established the cosmological argument. That's just one of many arguments out there to prove that there is a higher being and a God that exists. Now we'll look at the design argument, which was put forward by William Paley. William Paley was also a philosopher, and he put forward that everything we see in the world, you can see that it's been designed in a very specific way that allows everything to work harmoniously. For example, your eyes, they're put at the top of your body so that you can see everything, and they're not on your feet, which then you wouldn't be able to see much anyways. And that shows that there has to be, for everything like that you see in the world, and this is just the human body. If you look at it from a scientific angle, you'll see how complex it is. All the veins and, tissues, muscles, everything like that is so complicated. And that's just the human beings. And then when you look at animals and, the larger world out there, space, the galaxies upon galaxies, when you see things like that, what William Paley is getting at is things like that. They just can't have come about from themselves, or from nothing. There has to be someone who intricately designed the universe to exist in the manner that it does today. And that's what William Paley is getting at. And the universe, the creator that created this universe has to have the creative capacity to create something so intricate and complicated. And only God can possess those qualities of, the creative capacity to create the universe. And because when you look at it and you see how intricate it is, you can't come about on its own. There's a very interesting story from an Islamic perspective about Imam Abu Hanifa and the atheist. So he was waiting to have a debate with an atheist in Kufa, and Imam Abu Hanifa was known to have big debates with atheists in public. And when the atheist, hello, okay, so okay, I'll carry on. When the atheist came to Kufa, he was looking for someone to debate, and the governor of Kufa, he went to Imam Abu Hanifa. And when the debate was happening, the atheist arrived, everyone arrived, and Imam Abu Hanifa was running late. And he came very late to the debate. And the atheist said to him, what type of Muslim are you? You can't even, come to a debate on time. A time was given and you didn't come on time. And Imam Abu Hanifa, is very, very interesting what he says. He says that, yeah, I apologize. I was, delayed, but I have a valid reason. See, my house is on the other side of the river. And to cross, you have to take a boat. But there was no boat for me to take. No boat was coming. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And then suddenly I see the tree, it cuts itself up into pieces all on its own, and then it forms into a boat all on its own, and it carries me to the other side of the river all on its own with no help at all, nothing. I didn't do anything, nobody chopped up the tree, nothing. And the atheist goes, what a load of hocus pocus, what is this? And the Imam Abu Hanifa goes, that's it, game over, debate finished. And the atheist goes, how is the debate finished? You haven't even done anything, you just arrived. And Imam Abu Hanifa, his reply was, so amazing and so intelligent. It just reflects on how intelligent his character was and his brain and things. He said, if a tree can't, if a boat can't come into being on its own, then how do you imagine that the universe, the birds and the bees and the seas, trees, the human beings, how did they all come into existence on their own? And you look at how intricately designed the universe is. The only way it could have been designed is by someone who has that creative capacity to design such a big and complicated universe. And that being has to be God, because that is our understanding of God, someone who has that supernatural power to do something like that. And so that's basically the design argument in a nutshell, put forward by William Paley, who was a philosopher. Also, we have another argument put forward by Thomas Aquinas, similar to the cosmological argument. Thomas Aquinas actually puts forward about, I think 5 different arguments. They're called the 5 ways to prove the existence of God. And the argument we're going to be looking at is the necessary and contingent, the argument from the necessary and contingent existence. So a necessary existence is something, is a being, is an existence that has a few criterions. He does not require on anyone else to come into being, and he does not require anyone else to continue his being, and he is eternal. So he does not require anyone to come into existence, doesn't require anyone's help. He doesn't require anyone's help. He doesn't rely on anyone to continue his existence, and he's eternal. He doesn't have a beginning and he does not have an end. Now, a contingent being is one that first of all has a beginning, has an end, which means it will have a beginning, will come into existence, it will cease to exist at one point. It requires something to come into existence, and it requires something to continue its existence. It requires someone's help to continue its existence. Now, let's go back to the necessary existence. Actually, let's focus on the contingent. Contingent being, it has to rely on someone else to come into being. Now, for example, let's use a human being, for example. It relies on its mother and father to come into existence. And for it to continue existing, it requires many things, like it will require food, water, it will require its parents' help when it's a baby, when it's old, it will require other people's help as well. Now, a necessary being does not require anything else to come into being. It's eternal, and it doesn't require anyone's help to continue existing. Now, let's put it into perspective. A contingent being must rely on something else, and that thing relied on something else, and that thing relied on something else. For example, the human being, it relied on his parents. Now, its parents, let's maybe look at his father. It relied on his parents. His father relied on his parents, and his parents relied on his parents. And we go all the way back to the being of a, we go all the way back to God. Let's put God aside. We have to go all the way back to someone who does not rely on someone else to come into being. It requires someone else. What was I saying? Yeah, so the contingent existence requires something else to come into being, and the chain must stop at a point where there is someone who does not require someone else's help to come into being. So the chain stops. And that's what a necessary existence is, because the definition is something that does not require anyone's help to come into being, and that is the necessary existence. So the contingent existence, we've established now that the contingent existence relies on the necessary existence to come into being. Now, what example do we have of a necessary existence? Well, let's establish the criterion again for a necessary existence. He is eternal. Now, is God eternal? He is first and he is the last. He does not have a beginning and he does not have an end. So that criterion has been established. Number two, God doesn't require anyone else's help to come into existence. Well, clearly not, because first of all, he was not created. And number two, who is God going to rely on? There's no one higher than God for him to rely on. There's no one who can, God doesn't need to rely on anyone for his existence. And number three, God does not rely on anyone to continue his existence. Well, God, who is he going to rely on to continue on his existence? There is no one he can rely on. So therefore, the argument from necessary and contingent existence does prove the existence of God. And yeah, that's literally the necessary and contingent existence argument in a nutshell, put forward by Thomas Aquinas. And that's the three arguments. They clearly indicate that there is a God that exists. And there are many other arguments you'll find from Thomas Aquinas himself. He puts forward the argument of, Zakariya looked at cosmological argument. You have the argument for motion. He himself puts forward another design argument similar to William Paley. William Paley also argues about another design argument, that everything is designed for a purpose. And you can go online and you can find all this stuff. Obviously, we don't have time to look at every single argument put forward. Now I'll give it to Zakariya Olad, who will talk about the history of how theism evolved and how the arguments came into existence themselves. So Zakariya, if you want to.
No, that's actually not what I was going to look at. I was going to look more at the history of proving that, okay, we've proven logically that monotheism is coherent just right now. But someone might come along and ask, okay, fine, if you've proven it, then what did the people before think? They must have agreed with you, no? They must have been monotheists as well, no? So the idea is I'm going to try, and history doesn't care about our feelings and how we think. It's going to give you the objective truth of what happened. So I'm going to try prove that. And even in the Islamic narrative, our forefathers were all monotheists. Then they fell into shirk. All around the world, you see mushriks now. But the idea is I want to vindicate the Islamic perspective and prove that if we go ancient, I'm talking 5,000 years back, monotheism was rife, and even longer than that. So, okay, Bismillah. Now, all these civilizations I'm going to look into, these are all compiled by William Schmidt in his Vienna Institute of Anthropology. He compiled all of this. But before I get into that, from an Islamic perspective, we believe in the fitrah, which is basically that God has already created us and coded us with this innate belief that He is one, He is without any partners, He is the most merciful, and we call upon Him in His time of need. And in 2012, Oxford did a multi-million-dollar study all across the world to prove if children believe in God. And they took multiple kids all around the world and they developed them without introducing them to religion or atheism or anything until they reached an age where they were able to speak fluently. And they asked them, is there a God or is there a creator? And all of them said, of course, obviously there is. And then they asked them, they looked more and more into it, and they asked them, is this God a man? What is he? And the results were very interesting. They gave analogies like, no, he's not physical. He's kind of like gas or smoke or like spirit. So they gave those analogies. And the Quran talks about this as well. These mushrikun in Surah Al-Ankabut. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فإذا ركبوا في الفلك دعوا الله مخلصين له الدين فلما نجاهم إلى البر إذا هم يشركون. That when they're on a ship that's hit by a storm, they call out to God, مخلصين له الدين, so sincere and pure heart. فلما نجاهم إلى when Allah takes them to the shore and delivers them safely, they start worshipping their idols again. And the Quran makes this claim. So, and I've spoken to atheists as well, and most of them have said that whenever I'm in mortal danger or I'm in a life or death experience, they find that they just call out to God. It's illogical completely, but they just find that they do different positions of prayer. Sometimes they raise their hands, sometimes they go into sujood, sometimes they take their sandals off or their shoes off. So now the best time to look at this pure fitra that comes out is when they're in innate life or death danger. So all I need to do is prove that mushrikun in the past did this before we get into monotheism. So Frederick Hiller in his book Dishkibit mentions that there's always been this special reverence and awe in prayer. We mustn't forget the psychology in this. Men tilt their heads and go in prostration or take off their sandals, all of which isn't magic spells, but in awe of the unseen spirit who dwells far above who dwells far above man, and whose attributes is unlike the mortals. In his book, he speaks about a prayer from the Delaware region, or in what would be modern day Oklahoma, from the Native American Indians. And one of these people, before they go into battle, what does he do? Does he call upon the jinn? Does he call upon the evil spirits? Does he call upon the dead? Does he call upon the idols? No. Let's see what he does instead in dire need. O great spirit above, have pity on me and on my children and on my wife, and let them not mourn for me if I die, and slay my enemies before me and allow me to return home safely. Now, another example, John Tanner, who was kidnapped by the Ojibwe Indian tribes at age 9, in his autobiography, he says, I was adopted by the chiefess of the Ottawa tribe, and she adopted me as her son. During my stay, I was going to sea with the Indians, and we invoked a great spirit before our perilous voyage. This is exactly the Quran in the example. We passed on into the sea about 200 yards when the boat stopped altogether. The chiefess invoked the great spirit, and he said, you have made the sea and you have made us, and you have also arranged the sea to make it safe for us. Then we prayed this way for the next 10 minutes. Then we drew into the sea a handful of tobacco. Then the canoes all followed us into the sea, and we went through the sea safely. Now, I've proven that all these mushrikun, they have this innate fitra, and I've proven that societies that wasn't even in contact with monotheism, all they knew was shirk. It came out when they were in dire need, when they needed them the most. So the idea is now, I'm going to go back in time, even before these mushrikun, and establish monotheism, historical monotheism. Okay. Probably the best example to go to is China, since they existed, the first Chinese civilizations existed around the time of the ancient Egyptians. But strangely enough, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, and all these civilizations, they just disappeared. including the Assyrians. And there's a really strange history studies that have gone into it. But it's very interesting, but they've been wiped out. So we can't really look as well into their stuff. But what remained pure was the Chinese and in that area. And they had thousands of libraries that had tens of thousands of books for up to 5,000, tens of thousands of years earlier. And it's without a doubt the best window into the past. And the word that comes most commonly as you go more and more back into time, into these Chinese works, is Shang-Ti. And this can be translated into two ways: God Most High or Emperor of Heaven, depending on which translation you look into. He wasn't, and when they described Shang-Ti, he wasn't just God of the Chinese, he was God of all mankind. He was beneficent, just, eternal, and all-powerful, and could not be portrayed by any idol. I want to hammer this home. Pure monotheism, yeah? This is before all the shirk came in. Pure monotheism. He could not be portrayed by an idol. This is the Islamic perspective entirely. Okay. As time went on, they fell more into Confucianism and philosophy, and they found that other idols and false gods that wasn't Shang-Ti were around them, and they were very noble in prayer, and they basically started adopting these more and more and more, and they were falling into sin more, doing murder, evil, rape, this, that, and the other, and they lose the connection with Shang-Ti, and Shaitan comes along and says, hey, now Shang-Ti's too high for you to call out and pray, you're too sinful, so what we're going to do, you worship this guy to get closer to Shang-Ti. And this is exactly what the Arabs did at Muhammad Sallallahu time. The Christians do this. They say Jesus is the intercessor. Jews do this. They pray to their dead rabbis, and they say it's perfectly fine. Shias do this. Sufis do this. Multiple different groups do this. But Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah were the only guys on earth, as well as the past nations, who are doing this.
I just want to, sorry. There was some scholars who, like Sheikh Yasir Qadi himself, said that grave worshipping isn't a sin, isn't shirk in and of itself. But there's many scholars who refuted that and said something like grave worshipping and worshipping graves is definitely shirk, because you're calling upon someone else other than Allah for help.
Anyways, that's a different topic. We want to stay on point.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out because it's quite important. Some people think in it.
Okay. Fujiwara Saka, who was a 16th century Japanese Confucianist, came to believe in one God, simply looking at the Chinese sources and discovering Shang-Ti. Some of the ancient works, this purely vindicates the Islamic perspective, because the Judeo-Christian perspective is, yes, everyone was monotheist, but the only people who got laws and a Sharia was Noah, who got the 7 Noahide laws, and Musa alayhi salam on Mount Sinai. No one else got a law. Whereas the Muslim comes in and says, no, there were prophets sent to all different people. Can you remind me of the ayah where it says that we haven't sent a prophet except that he taught his people La ilaha illallahu wa anijtanibu at-taghut, and avoid fault. Do you remember the ayah, Maheer?
No, not really. I can try getting up one second.
Okay. Yeah, done it. But this vindicates the Islamic perspective, which is that there were prophets sent, but also they came with a Sharia, and this Sharia could have been differences between each prophet. Do you understand? And the ancient sources, and if we go even further back, before even the monotheism, they mentioned the laws revealed by Shang-Ti. And scholars say when the Chinese arrived in what would be called today China, they already had some of the laws of Shang-Ti with them.
Do you want the verse I've got it out?
Pardon?
Do you want the verse I've got it out?
No, but I've already hammered the point home.
Okay, well, it's verse 1, verse 21, chapter 21, verse 25, if anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah. Okay, now probably the best one after China, though historically it's more hazy, but it's definitely clear the monotheism was there, and it's even closer to Islam than Shang-Ti and the Chinese, is what? Zoroastrianism, which is the traditional Persian religion before Islam, and is probably the best example of pure fitri monotheism. The original aqidah, the foundation was the only true God was Ahura Mazda, and he had no equal besides him, but he also sent his prophet Zoroaster. This was their foundation. Now, the most ancient most ancient text mention Ahura Mazda. Actually, this is mind-blowing, wallahi, exactly the Islamic perspective. One day he will resurrect us all from the dead, and he will judge between the good and the evil, and the good get rewarded eternally, and the evil get punished eternally. Pure Islamic, that concept, as well as prophethood. Now, what seems to be slightly missing is the laws with Zoroaster. They did have practices, but this was clearly corrupted over time. Now, there's no mention of what would be dualism that people associate with Zoroastrianism today. That came much later. The dualists that corrupted the teachings of Zoroaster said that there's the cosmos and the universe is in an eternal battle between Ahura Mazda and Arima, who is basically Satan to them. The earliest sources don't mention this at all. I want to stress this. In fact, the earliest sources preached only worshipping Ahura Mazda, and the later sources went into dualism, this eternal battle between God and Satan and good and evil, and they're all always on the same level. Then after that, they fell into shirk and polytheism, or worshipping all these gods. And these are definitely the two best examples. Okay, I'm kind of running out of time. Actually, I might go over time. I'm sorry, Thanim, but I'm gonna go over time. Now I'm gonna do Koreans. I'm gonna do the Koreans. The Koreans believed in Daejeonism. I can't even pronounce it, which is that they had one God and no equal. But then slowly, they started to believe God had a son. Then after that, they started to believe in what? The Trinity. This is long before Christianity, yeah? They started to believe in the Trinity. And look at Shaitan's tactics. He never changes. He has a script and it works with us. And he repeats it and repeats it. If polytheism...
Trinity that they believed in? What were the three gods?
I actually don't know the three persons in the Trinity. But I know they believed in the Trinity. Wait, give me a sec. Shall I search out?
We haven't got much time, so we can...
Okay, but they believed in the Trinity. I'm not even joking with you. And when the Christian missionaries entered Korea and China, and they mentioned the Trinity, the Chinese and the Koreans were insulted. They said, we've had this long before you. Do you take us as some mugs or something? They were very, very angry. They were insulted. And but if polytheism or atheism was true, I want to hammer this home. There should be no trace of this at all whatsoever. Monotheism shouldn't be here. Monotheism should be a deformity, a later corruption of the original polytheism. But we don't find that. Egypt, now we're going to go into Egypt. Egypt is the most polytheistic society without a doubt. But again, the earliest inscriptions can only be taken in the monotheistic sense. You have inscriptions quoting God Almighty. I can't remember what the word used, but it means God Almighty. And he says, I am the avenger. I am the one who rewards those who do good and punishes those who do evil. Granted, Egypt is probably the hardest to prove. But if polytheism was true, you shouldn't find this one God prevailing over all the rest at all. I'm going to go finally into the Sumerians, and then I'm going to do my conclusion. The Sumerians, the ancient Sumerians, their works were translated by Arthur Custins and David Langan, who are both specialists in the Sumerian cuneiform. After they translated their cuneiforms, I'm just going to take 2 more minutes. After they translated all their cuneiforms, they found 5,000 gods. However, as they became more efficient and time went on and on and on, how many did it get narrowed down to? 3. And I guarantee you, as they get more and more efficient, they will only narrow it down to 1. And even with the ancient Hindus and all of their stuff as well, it was narrowed down to, I think, roughly 12. So even in, hang on. I want to do India really badly. I had like bare notes on India. India was the best one, or should I just jump to the conclusion?
Skip to India quickly.
Can't find it. I don't know where I had my notes on India. Hold on. Yeah, I'm just gonna jump into the conclusion. Sorry, guys. The conclusion, and again, the scholar that I originally quoted, who compiled all of this, William Schmidt, he divided the primitive tribes and early history into three stages. First stage being more pure and monotheistic and better morally and much better in character and conduct. The last stage, they became polytheists, pure polytheists, and savage in character and degenerative in their morality. And he found this conclusion that when man falls into sin and loses his morals, he comes to the conclusion that you've fallen too far away from God. So they start worshipping their ancestors and their graves and all of this stuff as intercessors. And they fall into sin, and they focus more on the transcendency of God rather than the mercy of God. I found my finger on India. Should I just quickly do it?
We'll leave time at the end. We'll come back to it, all right? We'll leave about
No.
2 minutes.
What the idea that I thought we were going to go into until 40, then the stream will end, and then we'll answer the questions in the second stream. Should we do that?
Quickly, I'll give you got 2 minutes for that, yeah?
Okay, fine. Max Muller, again, another scholar of religion, mainly in India, said there's less paganism, and as he went more and more back in time into their inscriptions and their writings, there was roughly a dozen gods, around 12-ish gods. And the Rig Veda mostly addressed, the earliest scripture, the Rig Veda, mostly addressed God as one supreme God. His theory was, and this is where Judaism goes into the direction, they don't lose sight of the mercy of God, but here's the direction that Judaism goes into. His theory was they broke down the attributes of God and they divided them individually, and they started worshipping these individual attributes and turned them into gods. And this is why I say the Ash'ari are very dangerous with their philosophy and their ilm al-kalam, and they break down the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is dangerous because it can lead to shirk. But their earliest passages and their scriptures mention only one God. And their ancestors, the ancestors of some Indians, some Persians, and were the Indo-Aryan Europeans. And they only did pure monotheism. And the word they used was Dias Patal. That's the phrase they used, which means father gods. And these were the ancestors of what? The Europeans, Persians, and some Indians. And you can see all around the world, pure monotheism. But anyways, the conclusion that most of the scholars have gone to is that when man falls into sin, at the beginning, purely they're moral, they're monotheists, they're more moral character, and they follow some sort of strict criterion. After a while, they fall into sin, they lose sight of God's mercy, and they focus more on the fact that God is transcendent and he's far above us. Then they worship these intercessors to get closer to God. Or they go to the Indian route, which is they break down the attributes of God and they start worshipping individually. And this is where the Ash'ari are very dangerous. That's why they're very, very dangerous. But this is the conclusion that we reach. Now I'm done. Yeah, all right. That's it.
That's very interesting, yeah. Seeing about the history of polytheism and monotheism and things like that. But yeah, we're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be back for the obviously Q&A session as usual. If anyone does have any questions, we have collated a few. If anyone does have any other ones, if you have any time left, please leave them in the comments, and we'll, if there's any time left, we'll go through those as well. But we'll be back in a minute, in a couple of minutes, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
فارحلوا دوما فإن لا نرى للخبث دار سنهد عرشكم وسنفني ملككم فارحلوا دوما فإن لا نرى للخبث دار قالوا إنها وعد نحن عصبة الأسد فأتاهم زحفنا زائلون للأبد ثم نادوا حسمت إنها قد رسمت فأتاهم ردنا صعقت بل سحقت قالوا إنها وعد نحن عصبة الأسد فأتاهم زحفنا زائلون للأبد ثم نادوا حسمت إنها قد رسمت فأتاهم ردنا صعقت بل سحقت. عصبة الشر ارحلي واسمعي مني القرار هجر الديار دوما نحن فرسان النهار. عصبة الشر ارحلي واسمعي مني القرار هجر الديار دوما نحن فرسان النهار. واشربي للذل كأسا وخذي كل صغار وارحلي دون الرجوع إن جلا ذاك الستار. واشربي للذل كأسا وخذي كل صغار. قالوا إنها وعد نحن عصبة الأسد فأتاهم زحفنا زائلون للأبد ثم نادوا حسمت إنها قد رسمت فأتاهم ردنا صعقت بل سحقت. قالوا إنها وعد نحن عصبة الأسد فأتاهم زحفنا زائلون للأبد ثم نادوا حسمت إنها قد رسمت فأتاهم ردنا صعقت بل سحقت. يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. يتراءى بالكبرياء. يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. يتراءى بالكبرياء. ذاك شهيد في علاه أسمع الدنيا صدى. ذاك شهيد في علاه أسمع الدنيا صدى. هيا سيروا في خطاه فالجنان كانت مناه. فالجنان كانت مناه. إنني أرتجي أمة عظم المرام. أمة عظم المرام. يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. يتراءى بالكبرياء. فلتهنئي أم الشهيد أعطاه الله ما يريد. فلتهنئي أم الشهيد أعطاه الله ما يريد. 70 حورا ومزيد وغدا يشفع في العبيد. وغدا يشفع في العبيد. إنني أرتجي أمة عظم المرام. أمة عظم المرام. يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء. يتراءى بالكبرياء. زوج الشهيد كفاك فخرا كم من وليد أبقاه ذخرا. زوج الشهيد كفاك فخرا كم من وليد أبقاه ذخرا. من دماه فاح عطرا شيد للإسلام نصرا. شيد للإسلام نصرا. إنني أرتجي
أمة عظم المرام
يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء، نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء، نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء، يتراءى بالكبرياء.
يا ابن الشهيد أنت البطل، كم ضربت لنا من مثل.
يا ابن الشهيد أنت البطل، كم ضربت لنا من مثل.
حين رأيت أباك قتل،
قلت أبي حي لم يزل،
قلت أبي حي لم يزل. إنني
أرتجي أمة عظم المرام،
أمة عظم المرام.
يا شهيدا علمنا معنى العزة والإباء، نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء، نراه نجما ساطعا يتراءى بالكبرياء، يتراءى بالكبرياء.
فالموت حتم لازم، كل العوالم للفناء.
الموت حتم لازم، كل العوالم للفناء.
فاختر لنفسك موتة
تلقى بها رب السماء،
تلقى بها رب السماء.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, everyone. So yeah, we're gonna start the second part of today's session. We're doing the question and answer session. So we have collated some questions. We've got about 4 or 5. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the chat, and if you have time, we'll go through them, inshallah. So question number 1 is, how can an all-loving God allow evil to exist? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine this with question 2 because it's quite similar as well. Can God be all good and all powerful if evil exists? So number 1 is, how can an all-loving God allow evil to exist? And can God be all good and all powerful if evil exists? Now, yeah, so this is the question of evil and suffering. And, does this notion of evil and suffering undermine the existence of a God? Now, what was put forward is what is known as the logical presentation of the problem of evil. And it states as follows: there's 2 premises. Evil exists, and premise 2 is an omnibenevolent, which means all loving, and omnipotent, which is all powerful, God would always stop evil. And the conclusion they reach from this is that there is no God, or at least not the God of the classical theism that we believe in, an all-powerful, all-loving God. Now, what this is also known as the inconsistent triad of God being omnibenevolent, and God being omnipotent. And this notion of evil existing undermines that. If God is omnibenevolent, then he would stop evil. If he is all loving, he would stop evil. And if he is all powerful, he would have the power to stop it. But since he doesn't stop evil, that shows that God doesn't exist. Now let's break this down. First of all, I'm going to give an Islamic answer for this. And the verse that Allah says in the Quran in Surah Ankabut, verse 2, that's I haven't got the chapter number, but it's Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 2.
29.
29, yeah, thanks. So 29, Allah says, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do you think that it's enough for you to just say that, we believe? Do you think that you people, it's enough for you to say that we believe and you will not be tested? That we're going to leave you alone? 100% Allah is telling you that we will test you. You're not just going to say, I believe in Allah and that's it. Allah's going to leave you alone. He's going to come and he's going to test you. And that, I think, is the strongest argument to undermine the problem of evil and suffering.
Just wanted to butt in. I think the next verse was very relevant as well, because Allah justifies it. Because someone might be asking, okay, why do we need a test? Then Allah says in the next verse, فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. That Allah will basically clearly distinguish those who are being truthful when they said we believe and those who are liars.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No problem. Thanks for chipping in. That is very important, that Allah is testing us. And let's just not just the notion of Allah, not the Islamic, God. Anyone who believes in a God, this problem of evil and suffering doesn't undermine his existence, because God, the evil existing, God has put it there to test us and to see how we react to evil. And this is, I believe, I may not be sure, but I think this is how Saint Augustine, a Christian scholar, tries to refute the logical presentation of evil. And the evil existing there, it doesn't undermine his existence, because God is trying to test us and he's trying to see how we react to evil. And, depending on how we react to evil, because the notion that life is a test, and how we react to evil will, decide sort of if we truly believe in God or not. And if we react in a positive way, and if we be patient and we endure and we ask for God's help, then yes, our belief in God is true and it's strong. But those who, if evil hits them, and if, they're tested with some sort of suffering, and they, that's it, oh, God doesn't love me, and all these type of thoughts that, Shaitan puts in you, then 100%, that shows that your evil isn't strong. Sorry, not your evil, your belief in God is not strong. And I think that's the main reason, that God, he wants to operationalize his creation, and that's why he's put evil out there, because he wants to see whether you truly believe in him or not, and he's testing you with the evil and suffering. I know I'm going on a little bit, but I'll let Zakariya take over with anything he wants to add in. But yeah, the main thing is that, God is trying to test us.
I just wanted to butt in as well, if Maheer doesn't mind. I think the best chapter to look at this is obviously Surah Al-Ankabut is probably second best, but Surah Al-Kahf as well. And I do believe that, how Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he told us that if we live in a time of Dajjal, that the best chapter to read for us is Surah Al-Kahf. The Rasulullah didn't tell us to read this just because, the Arabic sounds really nice, so it has magic abilities. He's telling us to read this so we internalize the message of the entire chapter. Now, you can split the chapter into multiple different segments. And at the beginning is a bunch of young men, right, who are being forced out of monotheism and worshipping Allah, and they're being forced into polytheism. And it actually says, إِذْ قَالُوا فَقَالُوا رَبُّنَا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. That remember when those young men said that our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. لَن نَدْعُوَ مِن دُونِهِ إِلَهًا لَقَدْ قُلْنَا إِذًا شَطَطًا. That we will not call on any God besides him, otherwise we'd be uttering basically a terrible lie or an awful lie. And what happens? They go into a cave, and Allah, even when it makes zero sense to them, they've been suffering under these pagans, Allah opens up doors from where they couldn't even imagine. And he extends his mercy to them until they slept in the cave for generations. The Quran says, I think, that 300 years plus 9, 309 years. And then when they come back down, the people basically all become Muslims. They say, holy crap, like these guys were actually, do you get it? And they had proof. They brought their ancient coins from 300 years ago and their clothing and stuff. And then we can split the chapter again into the two men that had their gardens. And one of them was a kuffar, that and if this didn't happen, Allah said it was a parable. But one of them was a kuffar, and his garden was better than the other guy, who was a Muslim. And he said, I'm better than you, basically. My garden is much better than you. I don't think the day of judgment will ever come, nor do I even think I'll ever die, nor do I think any of this will even go away. And the guy said, I can't remember the phrase in Arabic used, but how can you reject the man who formed you from a drop of thingy, like sperm or fluid? Then he made you into a ball of flesh, and then he made you into a full man, and he gave you everything. And then he said, Allah could send down a bolt of lightning to turn everything into dust, or he could just get the water to suck up the ground completely. The water just gets sucked. And basically, and he brings all these analogies where the mu'min who's really believing in Allah, he's down and out. It looks like he's down and out, but it's really a test to make you suffer. Again, the best example of this is what? Musa and Khidr, that story. Same chapter. What does Khidr do? He says, he drills a hole into a boat and the people are about to drown. And then the people barely make it out of the ship alive. And then he goes to a little boy and he kills the boy outright. Then after their long journey, they go into a village and they ask for food. They're exhausted. The people say, no, we're not going to give you anything. And then within that village, Khidr, he finds a wall that is about to collapse and he sets it upright and he saves it. And then Musa says, what? You could have asked for some money for that. That's the least you could have done. Then Musa and Khidr said, this is where me and you part ways now. And he explains everything from the beginning. He said, as for the people on the boat, there was a tyrant king down the river. He would have seized every boat that functioned by force and he would have killed anyone on the boat. So I saved them, basically. And as for the boy was a kafir and he was oppressing his parents. And Allah wanted him and his family to still be in Jannah, but also to be just. So what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He had the boy basically be killed so the boy could go straight to Jannah. And in a hadith, it mentions that someone might say, that's oppression. That's torture. You're poor. But that hadith mentioned that if a person is dipped into Jannah for even a second, they forget all the pain they even felt. So Allah wanted all of them to be reunited. Then he says, the final one, the people in the village and the wall, he said that there was a man who had 2 children and he was very righteous. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. That he was like very, very righteous. And he had a lot of money hidden under the wall and he kept it for their inheritance money. And he wanted them, his 2 children, to take the money basically. I've been put off now, to take the money when they reach a suitable age. So he set the wall up right so the people in the town wouldn't steal from the money and discover it, and they could have the inheritance money. And this chapter really hammers home the concept of, it might not make sense to you at first, it might seem unjust to you. And literally the first few verses of Surah Al-Ankabut, as we continue, what does Allah say? أَمْ حَسِبَ الَّذِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ أَنْ يَسْبِقُونَ. Now, do you think the evil doers really do they think that they can escape from our judgment? Do they really think, سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ, how wrong is their judgment? And then Allah hammers the point home of meeting with Allah. But here's the kicker, yeah. Verse 10, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ فَإِذَا أُوذِيَ فِي اللَّهِ جَعَلَ فِتْنَةَ النَّاسِ كَعَذَابِ اللَّهِ. That, pardon?
If I can just
I'm
interrupt.
literally, this is the last verse I'm going to quote.
All right, no
And
problem.
it's Allah is hammering this point home, that amongst the people, the believers, they say that we believe in, we believe in Allah. And when Allah sends them a test, or persecution in their hands, they mistake it as punishment from Allah. The test, they mistake it as punishment from Allah and they start thinking evil of Allah. Then when an-Nasr, victory, comes from Allah, they turn to the true believers and then they say, that we were with you this entire time. We were persevering in this test. So Allah is telling you, don't mistake a bit of suffering as punishment. If anything, the Sahaba had the completely opposite mindset. They looked at the Quran and all the prophets. They had the most miserable lives. As soon as they felt even the slightest bit of comfort, they said, has Allah stopped loving me? That was their mindset, all of them. Has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped loving me? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he lived his life. Aisha radiallahu anha used to narrate, we never used to eat anything. She said there was nothing we used to eat except for dates and water. And it was very, very little food. And they lived a life of misery, people calling them majnoon, attacking them from all angles. Then you have the munafiqun hiding amongst them. But they understood. So this is just atheist rhetoric. Who comes in, they don't understand that an all just God, an all powerful, all just God, needs to test the people, not for himself, so they themselves can know who is really being truthful, who is being a liar. If all of us were living like kings, no one was suffering, then we wouldn't see the true, real men be distinguished from the little boys. Everyone would just have it easy.
Anyways,
Anyways,
I'm
gonna leave
the
that.
third question is for you anyways. I hope you're not too thin to speak. Now question 3 is, does the theory of evolution provide a better explanation as to why we are designed this way?
Yes, this is probably my favorite one. Evolution, what these scientists have done to deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they've used the unknown to make us understand the known, or make the known make sense to us, which makes no real sense. Do you understand where I'm coming from? The unknown that we can't understand, they pull that out of their backsides, and then they say, here's how to explain everything. What do I mean by this? So I'm going to give a general scientific statement, and then I'm going to follow up with and basically put it in layman's terms. Evolution presupposes homology. So what I mean by that is, say for example, I was a short Asian person with nice hair, mashallah, and Maheer was a short Asian person, and we looked identical. What evolution comes and says, and what evolution comes along and says is, yo, you and Maheer kind of look similar, but there's slight differences between you guys. You must have been related before. But hold on, you're negating the possibility that this could have just been a genetic variation that I could have had and Maheer could have inherited it. Who's to say that us two are related and we evolved from a different species? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have just created us similarly. I mean, probability-wise, it makes very much a lot of sense. So what these evolutionists they come with their presupposition, and they use that to explain the unknown. So
Yeah, you mute your mic.
oh, sorry, so it's just some background noise. So what these evolutionists they present it in a way, and you see it in your media. You've noticed in cartoons, TV series, they present evolution theory as a fact. Don't lie, Maheer. At school, what were they teaching us?
100%. When I found out that evolution wasn't actually as 100% concrete as they put it to you in primary school and secondary school, I was shocked, man. But the way they say it,
Yeah,
there's
but
no
also
explanation for it. It's 100% true. It's disgusting, man, how they try and think.
Yeah. In one of actually, I don't want to get into that. We'll do that in a video on evolution. But also another angle we can refute evolution is from a moral standpoint. Really and truly, morally, since they have no objective morality, and you're atheist, and you evolution, and this is a general statement that even this was brought to Richard Dawkins, the evolution atheist king. He said, someone asked him, they said to him, so if we're using your logic, then me raping and murdering is essentially as arbitrary as us evolving to have 6 fingers or 5 fingers. As arbitrary as us, we could have had 5 fingers, 6 fingers. Is that arbitrary? It's as arbitrary as me liking vanilla ice cream over chocolate ice cream. And the guy said, well, I suppose if you put it that way, then you must be right. But yeah, I'm going to pass it over to you. I'm going to move on to the next question now.
No, I just want to, since you mentioned Richard Dawkins, I just want to bring up something. What it was is Richard Dawkins, he writes a book called Origin of Species. And he himself, at the beginning of the book, he says something very, very, very interesting, and something that, people need to know. And that he says that, one second, sorry. So what he says is that, one second, sorry, give me a second. Yeah, sorry about that. So what he says is that, he says that you can use the facts that I've put forward in my book. You can use these facts to support an argument that is completely the opposite of what I've put forward, which is a theory of evolution. I'll say that one more time. He says at the beginning of his book, which is called Origin of Species, you can find it online, you can find it in a wherever library, whatever. And he says that you can use the facts that I've put forward from my findings and research in this book to undermine and say something that is completely the opposite of the argument and the theory of evolution that I've put forward. Now, if you move on to chapter 6 of his book, origin of species, he starts saying that the things that I've put forward, there are a lot of problems in my theory that are unsolvable, and I don't know how to solve it. And so the conclusion you can draw from these findings in this book, from the stuff that he's put forward in this book, is that Darwin, he believed that science can change, and his argument, it can change. It's not concrete like, we are taught in primary school and secondary school. Really, we need to understand that the theory of evolution, because when you try to talk to an atheist, every single time you talk to an atheist, like last week in the Speaker's Corner, wallahi, I'm telling you, every single time you talk to an atheist, they will tell you theory of evolution. Every time we're having one of these arguments about theism and stuff, someone will put forward, oh, the theory of evolution undermines it because there's scientific proof. Evolutionary biologists themselves argue that the theory of evolution is based on a highly probabilistic framework, and that it's not 100% concrete. Science can change.
And some of them have said that it's highly, highly unlikely. They've said it's 0.001%.
It is not concrete like we're taught. It really gets to me, man, and it's so annoying that people think that it's concrete and there's nothing against it. I was reading an article the other day by a scholar, a high Muslim scholar. I can't remember his name though. I'll put it in the description. But what he says is that he's a very, very good example. He says that Muslims and Jews, they've been circumcised for centuries upon centuries. So why is it that now some of them, the Muslims and Jews that have come afterwards, centuries later, why are some of them, not born with that sort of, circumcised thing down there?
That is a very, very good argument.
It's a very good argument. Why are we not evolving now then? Why for the last, tens of thousands of years have we stayed like this? Why have we not evolved? It's a very good point. I will try to find the scholar's name again and put it in the description. But it's a very good question. Why have we not evolved, and why our downstairs not like that now? Why are they not why we're not born circumcised?
Not just that. You can push the argument even once further. So where I'm from, Somalia, it's very hot, very, very, very hot desert, right? And Arabia is another very good example. Really, Arabs should be some of the blackest people on planet Earth. And South Africans should be some of the slightly lighter, around your skin color, just average. Because South Africa isn't that hot. It's around 10 degrees every day on a normal day. And Arabia is scorching, but the people there maintain a normal Middle Eastern look. Me, where I'm from, Somalia, you find many, many, many Somalis who are light skinned, but then ethnically they're Somali. No environmental adaptation, none of that. So, but you can continue there.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're just backing up my point even more. Please, people need to understand that this theory of evolution, it's not concrete. Even their own evolutionary biologists, they argue themselves that it's highly probabilistic. So it's not 100% concrete. And when someone throws this theory of evolution at me to undermine the existence of God, I don't even listen to it anymore. It's just so
not even just that. Richard Dawkins admitted in I think it was a podcast he was on, or something. It was like a chilled, laid back interview type thing.
Yeah.
And he said, and this was like, as we say in Somali, Af Bohan is like, he said it blatantly. He put all his, he said, if I get a theist or a monotheist and I make them convince them of evolution, their mind naturally goes to that undermines God. But how does evolution undermine God? Exactly. Think about it, man.
Exactly.
It doesn't.
Exactly.
He just said, I let them fill in the blanks. I deceived them, basically.
Yeah. All it can try to undermine, if it was concrete, is the design argument. But even, like I've said, it's not concrete. Their own biologists argue
their own scientists say it's unlikely, it's logically incoherent. There's no evidence.
I just want to point out as well, there's a lot of stuff that you're taught in secondary school and primary school that they're not concrete. Once you start looking at it afterwards, when you get older and you start researching, doing your own research, you'll find that science, most of it is probabilistic. The theories, they're not 100% proven. And if science has shown us anything, if it's shown us anything, it's that it changes. Like, didn't we used to believe that the universe was static, as it's said in the Bible that the universe is static? and it's not expanding. But then then science would agree with that. But then what does the Quran say? That the universe is expanding, and as science progressed, recently we discovered that the universe is actually expanding. So
Yeah.
imagine something as big as that. The universe is static. Boom, it's done. It doesn't expand. And recently we discovered that it does expand. It is expanding. And so something big like that it has changed as well. And
Not
anyways,
even that.
do you want to add anything else?
Not even that, right? It's completely conjecture, just as the Quran says, خَلَقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Are they the ones who created the heavens and the earth?
Yeah.
They are in complete, basically, uncertainty, doubt, conjecture, assuming, filling in the blanks constantly. And what's worse is, okay, we can be doubtful on some things, like what does the Quran mean by وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا سَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُم? You have 500 interpretations of that, of the Jesus crucifixion, the famous verse in the Quran. Okay, fine. But it's the fact that they have no evidence and then they assert it beyond something where there's clear evidence to support it. Imagine you say 1 + 1 is 2 and I've got evidence for this. And I say, no, shut up. 1 + 1 is 3. Don't ask any questions, even though there's no evidence for it.
Exactly. There you go.
So we're going to move on. We're kind of running out
So
of
we've
time.
got 2 left now. The next one is, could there be a team of gods and not just one monotheistic God, as the arguments that we put forward only prove the existence of a higher being? Now, yeah, it's a good question. But when someone does ask me this question, what I always say is, the arguments that we put forward and the purpose of today's stream was to prove that a higher being does exist. Now, once you accept that, before you start looking at all these different scriptures and, okay, maybe is it like, one God like Islam says, is there 3 gods in one like Christianity says, or, is it the Jewish God or whatever it is? First of all, what you need to accept is that there is a higher being and there is someone who created the universe, and forget there being a team of gods, that there is a God. The notion of God, it exists. There is something out there of a supernatural power. You need to first accept that. Then what you can do is you can move on and you can study the different scriptures, and you can study the Bible, you can study the Torah, you can study the Quran, and then you can come to the conclusion, which model do I find more persuasive? Do I find the model of there being 3 gods in one persuasive? Do I find the Jewish God persuasive? Or do I find Allah, the one monotheistic God, persuasive? And then you can make up your judgment. But a lot of, this isn't really a valid critique of these arguments, because these arguments aren't there to prove if it's 3 gods in one, if it's Allah, if it's a Jewish God, if it's idols or whatever. It's there to prove that a God, a higher being, does exist. And once you've accepted that, once you've accepted that the God does exist, then you can study the different scriptures, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, whatever, and then you can see which one do I find more persuasive and which one, sounds plausible. And then you can accept one of those, but first you need to accept that there is a higher being, and then you can move on to find out what is that higher being. So yeah, Zakariya, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, you don't even need to go further than the Quran itself.
Yeah.
It says, إِذَا لَهَبَ كُلَّ إِلَهٍ. This is Surah Al-Mu'minun, ayah 91, by the way, for those who want to look at it. إِذَا لَهَبَ كُلَّ إِلَهٍ مِّن بَعْدِ بما خلق ولعلهم بعضهم ولعل بعضهم على بعض. سبحان الله عما يصفون. That if there was more than one God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entertains this. If there was more than one God, each God would have taken away what he created. So imagine God number 1 creates earth. Then the other God says, hold on, I don't want earth. And he takes earth away. Then they take away what each one of them created. And what does it say? وَلَعَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That they would try to outstrip one another. They literally try to dominate one another. Let me give you an example. Let's do the Trinity example, right?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that myself.
The Trinity the model the Bible gives us is the Father's on the throne, Jesus is on the right side, and then the Holy Spirit is floating around everywhere. That's the idea. So, and each one has their own will. That's an ancient heresy. If you say all of them have one will, that's undermining each individual personhood in the Trinity. You're undermining that straight away, and you'd be burnt at the steakhouse and tortured to death in medieval Europe for that. So, as I was saying, imagine Jesus turns around And he looks at the father. He says, "Hold on, how comes you get to sit on the throne? That's not fair. I want to sit on the throne."
There has to be a compromise between the wills.
And then the Holy Spirit goes, "Yo, why am I floating around everywhere? I'm inside this guy, I'm inside that guy, and I'm not in heaven. Down here is dead, bro."
Yeah.
And another way we can look at it is, we'll use the Trinity example again, is imagine Jesus sees what I'm saying. He's like, "Look at what Zakariya is undermining us, even though we created him, this, that, and the other." And he says, "I want Zakariya to explode into 1,000,000 pieces." But then the father turns around and says, "No, I want it to live for 30 more years. And I want him to have a nice long life and children and stuff." Well, what happens now? Do you understand? The universe would be in complete and utter chaos. Nothing would be able to exist coherently. Yet, using the design argument, we see complete coherence in the universe and structure, organization, as a facilitation for life to exist. Granted, the scientists say, okay, it's very unlikely, but even then, it shouldn't be facilitated at all whatsoever. At all. Even being able to facilitate is so unlikely. So, judging by the coherence that we look around us and logical, philosophical arguments, common sense, we come to the conclusion that there can only be one unipersonal creator. And that creator has no partners, has no one equal to him. And as I'd like to take a verse out of Surah Al-Fatih, chapter 48, Yadullah fawqa aydihim. It literally, it doesn't mean this because the word yad has like 27 meanings, translations in Arabic.
Yes. I just want to point out something about the Arabic language is that one word doesn't just mean one thing. A lot of Christians will, not just Christians, non-Muslims will try to take out a verse, manipulate its meaning, but it was revealed in the Quraysh dialect, and therefore today's meanings, it will be like very difficult. It's very difficult to have the exact same meaning.
Yes. Not just that. The ones that the Christians love to take out of context is in Surah Ali Imran, where it says, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. Now, this word makr, mim, kaf, ra, has multiple meanings. The Christians take the one that they like, deception, and then they apply it to the first. And it comes out as they try to deceive Allah, and Allah deceived them, and Allah is the greatest of deceivers. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. But I can bring another ayah that uses the same exact word, mim, kaf, ra, makr, in Surah Al-Ibrahim, where it says, وَقَدْ مَكَرُوا مَكْرُ اللَّهِ وَقَدْ مَكَرُوا مَكْرَهُمْ وَإِنْ كَانَ مَكْرُهُمْ لِتَزُولَ مِنْهُ الْجِبَالِ. Now, if we translate it as deception, it will make no sense. Anyway, this is a completely different. We'll come back to this. We'll come back.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Anyways, we'll just move on to the last question now.
The last question, I'm doing that. I'll destroy it in literally 2 seconds. We don't even need it.
When he's omnipotent, then can he create a rock that he can't lift? So it's about the omnipotence paradox. So if you want to take that one.
Okay, so I'll take that. It's like this is a complete non-question. You don't entertain this question. It's like someone saying, "Why is the sky green?" Think about that question. Why is the sky green? It is a non-question because the question itself presupposes that God has limitations, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has limitations in his power. So already we've destroyed that claim within 2 seconds. You don't even need long philosophical jargon. You can just destroy that claim within 2 seconds because of the presupposition. It's like me saying, why are you Asian? You're on mute, Maheer.
Sorry, no, what I was saying is that omnipotence, it doesn't just mean God can do whatever he wants. It has to fit logic, and it's what God can do that is within his nature.
Yeah, 100%. Otherwise, the Christian model or the Hindu model would make sense that God becomes incarnated. And I just want to do one last thing. We were at Speaker's Corner yesterday, and Bob the Builder came with an argument that stumbled me at first, but I refuted him on it. And I brought a hadith, but I just want to really, because he might catch you out on this. Now, the argument is the Quran, is a completely different topic. But I just wanted to, because we've done everything we needed to do. We've got a bit of extra time until our iftar. Is the Quran the word of God? Yes. Okay. Is the word of God an attribute of God? Okay. Yes. Let me give you an example. Your speech isn't something distinct. It doesn't walk down the street. your speech is an attribute of you, just like your eyesight and stuff. Okay, fine. Can you, with your created mouth, lips, tongue, teeth, breath, recite the word of God, which is, as Muslims believe, pre-existing and eternal, because it's an attribute of God? Yes. Therefore, this is exactly what Christians say. This is incarnation. Yeah, something that is an attribute of God that's pre-existing and eternal, that has come down on earth and become in a created form and recited all around us. Now, this at first stumped me. Then I brought a hadith to vindicate my perspective. Have you heard the hadith that the person who recites the Quran a lot on Yawm al-Qiyamah, it will come in the form of a man and it will tell him, I was the one who kept you thirsty. Yeah, that hadith, that famous hadith. The hadith itself explicitly says it's your qira'at, your recitation of the Quran that comes in the form of a man, that manifests. So based on this hadith, I said that Rasulullah, who we believe is getting, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who we believe is getting wahi, revelation from God, and therefore is from God, operationalize the pre-existing eternal attribute of Allah, i.e. Kalamullah, and my recitation of the Quran. But both of them fall under the Quran. Therefore, my recitation isn't a manifestation of Allah, because my recitation still falls under the Quran, but Kalamullah, which falls under the Quran as well, what do you call it, are two separate things. Therefore, it doesn't come down to manifest. Did you understand my argument?
Yeah, 100%.
It's kind of complicated, but once you wrap your head around it, and the thing is, Bob stumped me on this. I was like, yo.
Bob was a bit funny yesterday, man, stuff he was doing. He was trying to tell me, anyways, I don't know backbite by him, not while posting or anything. But
Especially while we're posting.
That's what we can say. The videos are up there. He was a bit funny yesterday.
What
I did want to add in is that God, when someone says God can do everything, you need to understand that God can do everything that is within and is befitting to his majesty and is within his nature. Now, if I say, God,
I'm gonna play the critic now. The critic. I'm gonna say why.
Okay. Wait. So you're asking me why can God only do the things that is befitting to his nature?
Yes.
Well, God isn't. It's just so stupid. Like the answer I'm trying to give it. Can God create a being that's greater than himself? No, because
I want to give you an even better example. Can God cease to exist?
There you go. And the thing is, what I was saying is that can God create a being that is greater than himself?
No.
Another argument, which is an argument based on reasoning to prove the existence of God, is called the ontological argument. And what it starts with is by defining God, and it says that God is a bit of a complicated definition, but it says God is that than which nothing greater than be conceived. So if God is that, then which you can't think of anything greater than God. If you think of something greater than God, then that thing that you thought of is God. So if God creates something that is greater than himself, then that he is no longer God, because God is something that nothing can be greater than him.
Yes.
So that's just what I'm saying. God, so that way God can only do stuff that is, befitting to his majesty and limited to his nature, and he can't create something that is greater than himself. Now, if you create a rock that he can't lift, that means the rock is more powerful than him, because he's created something that he can't do. But
yeah, we're gonna conclude now.
We're gonna wrap up now, and I just want to wrap up with the verse that Zakariya said, do they think that that the universe was created from nothing? Or that they themselves were the creators? But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
That really summarizes everything.
Yes, that summarizes the Islamic, what we say against the notion of atheism. And yes, thank you everyone for joining and listening in. I just want to say thank you to Thanim, obviously, who's behind the scenes organizing these streams and stuff. It's quite difficult from the stuff. He spent 6 hours yesterday organizing it. So yeah, thank you to him.
Say wallah.
A lot of the work. Yeah, he put in 6 hours designing this, the software and all that stuff, man. So may Allah reward him in Ramadan, getting a lot of reward, alhamdulillah. May Allah bless him.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah reward him
for joining in. Hope it was beneficial. May Allah reward you for spending time gaining knowledge. And if whatever you want us to, next stream, whatever you want us to do, let us know on Instagram, comments, whatever you want us to do. we'll do another one this week, inshallah, and then after Ramadan it'll be once a week. But yeah, thank you for joining, and have a nice iftar, and hope Ramadan carries on going well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
عهدا علينا أسود العرين نمضي أماما أبد لا نلين
حتى إذا حان النفير عدنا جنودا نلبي المسير حتى إذا حان النفير عدنا جنودا نلبي المسير.
جند الله جند الله أبدا لن نحيد عن خطى الإيمان. دربنا درب قويم بالهدى القرآني سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله.
ولا بد يوما سيرجع الأقصى ليحيى الفداء بطول المدى. ولا بد يوما سيرجع الأقصى ليحيى الفداء بطول المدى.
لجنات ربي سار الشهيد عند ربه دوما أبد لا نحيد. لجنات ربي سار الشهيد عند ربه دوما أبد لا نحيد.
جند الله جند الله أبدا لن نحيد عن خطى الإيمان. دربنا درب قويم بالهدى القرآني سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله.
سنمضي جنودا ندك العدا وقرآن ربي لنا موردا. سنمضي جنودا ندك العدا وقرآن ربي لنا موردا
ويبعث فينا يقينا جديد فيوم الشهادة نصر مجيد. ويبعث فينا يقينا جديد فيوم الشهادة نصر مجيد.
جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله. أبدا لن نحيد عن خطى الإيمان. دربنا درب قويم بالهدى القرآني سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله سائر في طريق الحق يا جند الله جند الله جند الله جند الله.